while it's definitely true that dancers need that beautiful range of motion, by doing oversplits, it's actually causing them more harm than good. So I do feel like it's my responsibility as a therapist to kind of educate not only the dancers, but the teachers and the parents about the risk of performing these oversplits, and instead teach them alternative ways to achieve those positions that, they want to achieve.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Unchoreographed podcast. Today we are going to be diving into a topic that is top of mind for a lot of our dancers out there, the idea of stretching and more specifically overstretching. We are going to be busting some common myths about overstretching and sort of exploring how it can actually be more harmful to your body than do good. And if you have ever felt pressured into overstretching, especially by social media, and wondered if your stretching is doing you more harm than good, this episode is going to be for you. So today I am joined by Katie Oakley. She is a physical therapist assistant and clinic director of Aquacare Physical Therapy based out of Maryland. And she works closely with dancers, helping them perform at their best and stay injury-free. So today Katie is here to help me break down some of these harmful misconceptions around overstretching and give some clear guidance on maybe some more effective ways to be gaining flexibility. So Katie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Oakley. I'm a physical therapist assistant and dance medicine specialist at an outpatient clinic located in Salisbury, Maryland. So just like a lot of you, I started dancing at a very young age in many different styles. I grew up in a studio that did a lot of regional and national competitions. And then we would also do performing in our local community for community events. So when I got older, I then transitioned from dancing and a dancer into a teacher and a choreographer. So I did all of that through kind of my schooling, and I completed my Bachelor's of Science degree in exercise science from Salisbury University. And then shortly after that, I decided PTA was the path for me. So I started working as a therapist at Aquacare many, many years ago. And I quickly realized the need for dance medicine in my local community. So I did a little bit of research and became a certified dance medicine specialist. The clinic I work at has a lot of different specialties like vestibular and TMJ and Parkinson's. So the owners were really thrilled to bring another specialty in, but also one of the owners of Aquacare, her daughter is a dancer, a competitive dancer. So she saw the need not only as, an outpatient clinic owner, but also a dance mom. So I've been doing that for the past 5-6 years now. I'm currently the co-clinical director at my clinic, and I treat a variety of performing artists from figure skaters to dancers every day, and I absolutely love it.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like so many of our stories are so similar. That we just we're a dancer, transition into how do I still stay in this world?
Yeah.
And then there's such a need for dance medicine specialists everywhere. So I think that's awesome.
There really is. My husband's a physical therapist, and we wanted to have a family, but I was like, I'm not going to be at the studio until 9:30 every night. So yeah,
Seriously.
So it was definitely the natural path for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, so today, obviously, our topic is this idea of overstretching, which I know a lot of us in the dance medicine space are very, very passionate about, and the dangers sort of associated with it. So for anybody who is out there listening right now, can you give them sort of a brief rundown of what we actually define as overstretching?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So overstretching is such an important topic that I think a lot of dancers and parents don't want to hear about. Because I always hear, oh, but it works. So as a dance medicine therapist, I definitely don't recommend overstretching or oversplits. So basically, overstretching is where you take the body into a greater range of motion than it's intended to go. So every joint has its normal range of motion. So you're taking that and you're kind of forcing it out of that norm range of motion. So for example, dancers, the very, very common one I see is the front split, and then they take yoga blocks or big textbooks or even a chair sometimes, and they prop that ankle or that knee up And they, I've seen it done with the front leg. I've also seen it done with the back leg. They do it in straddles. And something what I'm seeing more often now is they'll take and try and push the point way further than it's intended to go. So I'll see them kind of like go into a point and then put their foot on a yoga block and then just kind of hang out there.
Mm.
Um, so I so a lot of dancers and teachers believe that by overstretching that they can obtain that perfect like 180 degrees and sometimes over it. And they also believe by doing this that it will make it easier for them to obtain that split or even achieve like greater leaps or extensions in other positions and not just the splits. So while it's definitely true that dancers need that beautiful range of motion, by doing over splits, it's actually causing them more harm than good. So I do feel like it's my responsibility as a therapist to kind of educate not only the dancers, but the teachers and the parents about the risk of performing these over splits and instead teach them alternative ways to achieve those positions that, they want to achieve.
Oh gosh, yeah, I know. I think all of us cringe a little bit when we see the yoga blocks come out or the chair, like you said. I mean, it's a really big problem in the dance world because so many believe that it is the best way to be stretching.
Yeah.
And there is so much harm around that thought. I think that there, like you said, like it really is just our responsibility. We need to be educating people on this because, I think they're probably educating themselves from not reliable sources sometimes, and making sure that we are making sure like that it is known that this is actually really, really damaging for the body, not just to the dancers, to the teachers. Like that's a really good point too. Like it's got to come from the top, So
Yeah.
what do you think? I mean, I have my thoughts, but what do you think the reasons that overstretching has become so prevalent today?
Well, I definitely think social media is huge. I mean, I was scrolling on my dance medicine Instagram this morning and I saw this like 8-year old up by the mirror and she had a teacher behind her and she had those stretchy straps kind of pulling into a straddle behind. And I'm like, oh. So, and then you see all these beautiful competition photos of like the gorgeous legs kind of going past 180. And I think they really truly believe that's the only way to get there. And they don't know what it's actually doing to the body. So they think they're stretching the muscle, but they're not. So I definitely think social media is a huge factor in that.
Yeah, I mean, I totally have to agree with you there. I think, yeah, the images that we see sometimes on social media are not great.
No, and
Not great.
usually I'll go and I'll look at the comments and the comments have been turned off. So
Yeah. Oh gosh, I feel like this is one of the most controversial things I've ever even talked about. Like, on my social media, I had a post that is close to viral as I'll ever get. But it was literally just talking about why we don't recommend overstretching, and it like blew up as far. I mean, again, my idea of viral is not actually viral, but
it's probably the
it
same one as mine.
but it was insane, like the amount of comments that I got, both really strongly polarizing opinions for it and against it. So it is this like very polarizing idea where there's people, you are on one side or the other. You are either like, absolutely not, this is terrible, or this is what we have to do. I feel like there isn't a lot of in between on this topic.
No,
It's
no.
very polarizing.
And I think there's like misconceptions too, because in PT school we learn about like time under tension and stuff like that. And I feel like they've taken that concept and kind of applied it to overstretching. But and that's where I feel like the education comes in because they don't know what they're actually doing to the joint and the ligaments instead of the muscles. And I do feel like they take that concept and kind of broaden that realm of it.
Oh, for sure. Well, let's get into a little bit about like what's actually happening.
Mhm.
So we've kind of talked about you're not stretching what you think you are. So give a little rundown of what's actually happening in the body.
Yep. So when you're overstretching, either in a split or another position, like that ankle I was talking about, so you're essentially letting gravity or an outside force push down on the joint and the ligaments. Um, so most people that are doing oversplits usually already have that muscle flexibility. They're trying to achieve that greater range. So when dancers put their leg up on blocks or something else, um, they're pushing it above that position. They're getting more stretch. They think they're getting more stretch out of the muscle, but in reality, they're actually now stretching the joint capsule and the ligaments that are surrounding it instead. And when you stretch the joint capsule and the ligaments, it causes damage down the road. So it contributes to that instability in that joint. Um, Ligaments provide that stability that we need for all of our joints. So unlike muscles, ligaments don't have that elastic property that muscles do. So muscles, when you stretch them, they can go back to their original form. When you're stretching a ligament, you stretch it and then it stays there. So ligaments don't have that ability to go back to how it was before being stretched. And when this happens, it loses the stability that it's meant to have. And I was listening to one of your videos and you use the analogy or the example of the recurring ankle sprains. And I use that a lot with the dancers because it's like a light bulb. They don't think of it in that aspect. So for the listeners, you had mentioned that usually when dancers have an ankle sprain, the sprain is happening to the ligament. You're overstretching the ligament and it can either become torn or a certain degree of a sprain. And that's why in dancers, you see a lot of recurrent ankle sprains following that initial one, because the muscles, unless they're in PT, they don't strengthen around that ankle. So that's essentially what you're doing when you're doing over splits and you're going into this greater range of motion. You're like spraining your body, is what I like to say. But when I mention that to the dancers, it's like, oh, it's such a light bulb for them, because what dancer hasn't had recurring ankle sprains usually? So they all usually can relate to that. Um, so, what we do in PT for ankle sprains is we strengthen the muscles around it, we do proprioception exercises, um, and really with overstretching, usually they're not doing those strengthening and stability exercises in conjunction. So they're just losing all of that stability that, is important for dancers to have. Um, so yeah, so it's not only going to affect them short term with the dance performance and competition season and performing, but it's definitely going to hurt them down the road as well. But I like to use that analogy because it's like, oh, that's what I'm doing. I
Yeah.
actually just had I had a dancer a couple weeks ago, and she has started doing oversplits, and she was very open with me about it. So I just used it as a little educational tool, and she said, "Oh, that's why my turns have kind of been off lately." And I'm like, "Yep, it's all a cause and effect." It was a great teaching moment, a great educational moment, but it's definitely when you put it into terms like that, the dancers are like, "Oh, I get it."
Yeah. Yeah, I think when it does, like, the light bulb goes off and it starts to click why, oh, I've been having trouble with this or with that, or, I see a lot of hip patients obviously, so it's like, oh, no wonder I have hip pain. So
Right.
yeah, it does. I think once they understand the concept, then they're like, oh, of course I shouldn't
Of
be doing that.
course I'm doing. Another one I've seen a lot recently is the dancers going back into that scorpion, with that perfect needle. But I almost always see a knee brace on the supporting knee. And it's usually because they're sitting back into that knee. So they're just stretching all those ligaments. So it's just, but once I tell them about it, they're like, oh, well, it makes sense. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it is really, really damaging. Again, like, because I specialize sort of in the hip area, sorry, hair in my mouth. Because I specialize in the hip area, I am seeing it correlated to a lot of labral tears, impingement, like that whole thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times surgeries are coming out of this as the very negative result.
Yeah.
And so the amount of damage that it is really doing to the tissue, it's tough because you can't see it from the outside. And
Right.
sometimes most of the time, you don't know that you've done tissue damage until it's too late. And now we're all of a sudden talking about you have a torn this, a torn that, surgeries on the table. And had you just backed up for a second and thought about, well, how do I achieve this in a safe way? You can usually still gain the flexibility you want and probably look a whole lot better doing it
Yeah.
if you've done it in a safe, more effective way.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think, again, that's why we're all so passionate about getting this topic out there, because there are really, really safe alternatives.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, do you see, so when you have a dancer comes into the clinic, what do you see that sort of indicates, I mentioned it with the hip stuff, but are there certain things that you notice that indicate to you that maybe a dancer's been pushing beyond what they should be doing?
Yeah. Usually I just see joints that are just extremely flexible and extremely mobile. They usually have a lack of strength or stability surrounding the joint, that they've been overstretching. I also see a lot of hip alignment discrepancies because they're pushing into these extreme ranges, and usually it's one side biasing the other. So I'll see a lot of hip alignment stuff. We do a lot with that in the clinic, which leads to that chronic low back pain, the hip pain, like you were talking about. Um, it's wild to me the amount of dancers that come in and we take them through the screening and I have them stand on one foot and close their eyes, and the amount of dancers that cannot do it, or the basic airplane test. It's hard for dancers. So I've been fortunate because a lot of the dancers know me personally outside of the clinic. So usually they're very prone to telling me if they do overstretch. So then it kind of opens up that door for that conversation to be had. So yeah, that's just a couple of the things that I definitely see in the clinic.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. The instability is crazy. Well, and so many of our dancers are already prone to hypermobility.
Right.
So because they're, to thrive in this career as a career, you do have to have pretty good mobility, pretty good
Yeah.
flexibility, and beautiful extensions and all of that. So we know that it's sort of a requirement of dancing. And so hypermobile, if a dancer's already hypermobile, they tend to be very successful at dance because they already have this great flexibility.
Right.
But like I always tell them, with great flexibility comes great responsibility.
Yes. I
Like
love that.
it's wonderful that you have all this range of motion, but if you don't learn how to control the range of motion, it means nothing.
Correct.
Not
Yeah.
only for an injury perspective, right? And like a
Hmm.
damage, but also performance. If you can't control this range of motion, you're not going to be able to get to that next level, even if you have amazing flexibility.
Right. Yeah. It's so true. I love that
Yeah.
saying. I'm going to start using that.
I feel like it's from a movie or something, isn't
I
it? Like
love
I made a little twist on it. I don't know what it's actually from, but yes. So, okay. So what would you say? What are some of the safer alternatives that you like to use with the dancers in the clinic, or specific techniques and things that you use?
Yeah. So I love coupling movements together to create more of like a dynamic exercise. So I put a flair of what they're used to doing in the studio and then couple it with a PT based exercise. Um, just to kind of get that buy-in with them too, because sometimes they'll come in and it's like, I don't want to do a basic quad set. So I couple it with something from that they're used to doing kind of dance wise. So a very, very popular one is that eccentric split. So where you're in the split and you put a furniture slider underneath that front foot, and then you kind of just slide down into a split, and then you use your hamstring to slide back up. And sometimes I'll start the dancer holding on to something that way they feel stable. So they'll slide down into the split and then slide back up. And then once they get a little bit more comfortable with that, I'll have them place their hands on their hips and just let, that hamstring really work. So that's a really, really good one. I also have one that I use for straddles. So I'll have them prop their one foot out on a furniture slider, and then they're on the knee of the opposite knee. And then I'll have them slide down into kind of like a half straddle, slide back up, and then they'll lift that hip into abduction to kind of get that co-contraction. So they'll have that co-contraction of the lifting, and then they'll slide back down to let that muscle relax, and then repeat. So those are a couple ones that I really, really like. Because usually what I see is sometimes they'll have great strength in the certain ranges of motion, but then when you have them go into a tilt or go into extension, they're lacking the strength with that last part of the range of motion. So, sometimes they can get that tilt up to like 120, but it's like that extra little And so I really, stress the importance of strengthening within the range of motion that you want to achieve. Um, so the dancers that I have tend to love it. And, sometimes I'm like, oh, I have 10 new exercises today. And they're like, oh man, we live in a time where we're so fortunate to have, things like Instagram and social media. I mean, there's definitely pros and cons to it, and you have to know what you're looking at. But the dance medicine world on Instagram has been so wonderful with exercises and just education and stuff. So I get a lot of my ideas from there.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you're getting it from like a vetted source that
Yes.
knows what they're doing, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Absolutely. I love what you said, though, about strengthening within the desired range.
Yeah.
That is so important because you're right. A lot of times, many of the traditional PT exercises, and I think this is why it's important to have a dance medicine specialist
Yeah,
if you're a
absolutely.
dancer, because the traditional PT exercises don't go to end range, right? Like what a
Right.
dancer needs as functional is not what a normal person needs. And so there isn't a lot of end range strengthening if you're
Right.
not working with someone who understands what that is.
Right.
So I
And
think that's huge.
yeah. And I talk a lot about like cross training with dancers, like in the off season, make sure you're cross training. Like it's my word, it's my buzzword. And I get a lot of, conversations of, okay, well, I'll go to the gym. And that is so wonderful. But that's where the dance medicine specialist comes into play because they can kind of look at what you're having trouble with, like with that tilt or that extension or whatever, and get exercises that are going to get you to that end range. So yeah, that basic gym exercise or even basic PT exercises won't obtain.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so like I agree. I love the exercises that you mentioned, those eccentrics. Actually, I have some videos of those. I don't know if you have any either, but if you do, let me know cuz send them my way. We'll link some of this stuff in the show notes so that
Okay,
if people
perfect.
are wondering what that actually looks like, they can
I was
actually click
wondering.
on it and see what it is.
I was going
Um
to like do a little demo, but I'm like in our back lymphedema room, so
Sorry, we'll get some videos linked in, no problem.
okay.
Yeah, but the eccentrics are huge. So, and that really, I mean, that's your way of building the control within the
Yeah.
range of motion, right? It's not just can I get into my split? It's how am I getting there? Can I get out of it? Like
Yeah.
I need to control my joint through that entire range of motion. So the eccentrics are a great, great, great way to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but do you ever like a lot of times I'll have my dancer come in and once they're warmed up, I'll say, "Okay, show me your splits. Let me see where you're at, where you're
Mhm.
lacking." And they'll show them to me and I'm like, "Okay, let's try this exercise." And then do the split again right after. And
Yes.
it is like a night and day difference. And I love when they're like, "Oh my gosh, I just got more range of motion out of that one exercise than I get out of my 30 minutes of stretching."
Yes. I did a workshop that last summer or the summer before last, and I did kind of like that cause and effect. Um, and I had two dancers, very similar build, but I took one through, we were on the topic of splits, and I took one through just strengthening exercises and the eccentric slider, and then I had the other one just sit in her split, which I usually would not recommend, but it was a really, really great learning, opportunity. And so by the end, the one who had done the strengthening and that eccentric type of exercises could achieve a better split, better um, it, versus the other one. So, and a lot of different factors go into that, of course, like body type and stuff like that. But it kind of honed in on the key point that I wanted to for that workshop. So it was kind of cool.
That's a great idea. Next time I do a stretch workshop, I'm totally steal that idea
Yes,
from you.
absolutely. That's fine.
That's a great idea. Awesome. Okay, so we've kind of like also touched on this idea that social media perpetuates this idea that sometimes maybe this is the way that you need to stretch.
Mm-hmm.
We know that dancers are seeing this out there. So, do you have any advice for dancers who are feeling this pressure that they need to, that like that's the norm and they need to achieve these ranges of motions? And it might be pressure from social media, it might be pressure from their friends, from the studio. What advice would you give to dancers?
It's so hard because dancers, we have pressure on us anyway, and now we have matching the trends on social media and the pressure of that, and the competition photos and the beautiful ballerina photos. So you're constantly getting all of this input. um so I just think it's something that requires some more education in the community, and I would, of course, strongly recommend getting in with a dance medicine specialist so that first you have the information for yourself as to why it is harmful. A lot of dancers that are graduating now are looking into the field of dance medicine. So I think that will absolutely help kind of the cause, because younger dancers now are seeing their peers um, not do it if they're getting into a field like this. So I think that's helpful. But I would just, get in with a dance medicine specialist, get the information for yourself. And then just try, the things of not overstretching, and try the exercises that, your dance specialist gives you. And, when you get more flexible and people ask what you've been doing, just share with them what you've been doing. Because not only are you going to be achieving what you want to achieve, but you're going to be stronger in the end because of it. And, I can definitely point out watching dancers on stage and seeing, those strong dancers. Like we just had the UDA Nationals, and it's so popular now. And, those are strong dancers. They're not doing oversplits in the back, So I think
Yeah.
we're definitely heading in the right direction of it. But there's still, some misconceptions that we need to bust.
Oh yeah, there totally is. It's really tough. I mean, there is a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So I feel like, like you said, making sure you're with a dance medicine specialist. And like what I tell my dancers when they come in and they start to understand and their
Hmm.
parents start to understand, oh yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. This makes sense.
Hmm.
One of the questions that I feel like I get a lot then is, well, what do I do? Because that's what they do in my studio. And
Right.
my answer to them is usually, I want you to tell your studio owner to contact me and I'm going
Hmm.
to do the hard work for you.
Yep.
Because I think also we can't expect putting our dancers in this situation. I mean, of course, we want dancers and parents, we want you to advocate for yourselves without a doubt. But
Right.
I also know the reality is that there is sometimes a little bit of fear in
Yeah.
standing up to some of the higher ups. And of course, we don't want that to be the case, but we have to recognize that it is the reality. And
Yeah.
so what I like to do is just take that out of the equation. I don't want them to not do what's good for their body because they're afraid to stand up for themselves. So
Right.
I generally am the one that does the first, like, hey, I am telling them they are not allowed to do this, and here's
Nope.
why.
Hmm.
And then after that, I think the dancer feels a lot more comfortable kind of reinforcing that, but at least
Oh
the
yeah.
hard work has like of I'm not allowed to do this has been done. And then I think it's a really good opener for, hey, like, would you like to learn maybe a little bit more about why we don't recommend this?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that is another important aspect of why you work with a dance medicine specialist, because we get it. We grew up in a studio, we understand, and those pressures and that kind of angst of going into a studio and I can't dance today or I can't do this. And I think a lot are quick to throw a boot on or throw something on. And in reality, that can, cause some more harm too. So I think that's just another aspect of why it's important to work with one of us because, we get it and we get that angst of going into the studio and
For sure. It's real.
yeah, yeah.
What would you say? So we have a dancer who is on board with not overstretching, and they're going to start, a healthy routine of flexibility and strength. How long do you usually tell them that this is going to take? Like, what's a realistic time frame for a dancer?
Yeah. So I usually they definitely want an overnight fix, which I think is the draw to the oversplits and stuff because you can sit there and stretch and then it's there. But usually I tell them at least 6 to 8 weeks for a good flexibility and strengthening program because that's when you're really getting that neuroplasticity for those joints and muscles and everything that your body needs. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important for them to understand it is not a quick fix. And you're right,
No.
that probably is some of the draw of
Yeah,
oversplits. Like, oh, I'm just going to sit here and then I'm going to have
I'm
this
good.
flexibility.
You just scroll on
Yeah.
TikTok.
Exactly, right? Well, and I think what's even scarier too is a lot of times they're doing that right before class
Yeah.
and then going into class. And we know, I mean, there is a whole lot of research in the dance world and the athletic world that
Hmm.
stretching prior to performance or in whatever the activity is you're going to be doing actually decreases your performance output. So it
Yeah.
decreases power and strength and all of that. And our dancers, here they are, they need a lot of power for the stage and they're hanging on the bar or hanging off a chair
Yes.
and then having to go jump.
The classic one is like getting into that sumo squat grand plie of second position. Like I see that all the time. I'm like,
I
oh,
know. I know. Oh, it's so true. It's so true. Well, yeah, I think hopefully we've given our dancers something to really think about here when they are trying to figure out what a safe stretching routine actually needs to look at. And I think hopefully we've cleared up some of those common misconceptions and given some tools of what to do in place of it.
yeah.
So thank you so much for being here and chatting with me, Caitlin. I think that this was a really, really good episode.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. And if you guys loved this episode, please do not forget to share it with a friend who might find it helpful. Leave a review and please reach out if you have a takeaway from this episode. We would love to hear from you. I'm going to go ahead and connect you guys with Katie in the comment or in the show notes. I'll put all of her information of where you can connect with her there. Thank you so much for being here, and we will see you guys next time on the Unchoreographed podcast.